Hello and welcome back to Poison Break, Toxic Tales at Work. Today we're diving into a question that so many people struggle with but rarely talk about openly. Why do we stay in toxic jobs even when we know they're hurting us? If you've ever found yourself dreading Mondays, questioning your worth, or feeling stuck in a workplace that drains you, this episode is definitely for you. And trust me, you are not alone and you are not weak either. There are real psychological mechanisms at play. So let's start with something important. People don't stay in toxic workplaces because they're lazy or because they don't try hard enough. They stay because toxic environments are designed consciously or unconsciously to keep them stuck. Research in organizational psychology shows that humans tolerate negative environments much longer when the negativity is unpredictable. That is really interesting, and this brings us to the first major concept. The concept is called intermittent reinforcement. It is one of the strongest psychological forces keeping people in toxic jobs, and this concept comes from B.F. Skinner's work on behavioral conditioning. It basically means when rewards come unpredictably, we cling to the situation even harder. This also refers to relationships. So in a workplace, in a toxic workplace, this looks like 10 days of criticism, for example, 1 day of praise, a week of silence, and suddenly a bonus or compliment, and then back to chaos. So your brain becomes addicted to the possibility of a good moment. It's the same mechanism that makes gambling addictive, actually. So you think, maybe next week will be better, or maybe my boss will finally appreciate me, or maybe this project will change everything. And that maybe is very powerful. Another reason why people stay is gaslighting. A manipulation tactic, I talked about this in another episode. It's a manipulation tactic where someone makes you question your own reality, basically. So in workplaces, this can sound like no one else has a problem with this. I don't know why you have a problem with this. You misunderstood. You're lucky to have this job. You're too sensitive. And over time, you start thinking that it's your fault, or that you're overreacting, or that you are not good enough. And also that you might not be good enough to be able to leave, Studies on workplace bullying shows that long-term exposure leads to reduced self-efficacy, meaning you literally start believing you're less capable than you actually are. And when you doubt yourself, leaving feels impossible. There's also trauma bonding, and trauma bonding is usually discussed in the context of relationships, but it can absolutely happen in professional environments too. It's a cycle of fear, relief, reward, and fear again. And this cycle creates emotional dependency. A toxic boss might humiliate you on Monday, ignore you on Tuesday, praise you on Wednesday, threaten your job on Thursday, and act like nothing happened on Friday. So your nervous system becomes hooked on the highs and lows. And this is not weakness. It is a survival response, clearly. Another one is the sunk cost fallacy. If you've never heard of this, this is a classic cognitive bias. It means the more time, energy, or effort you've invested in something, the harder it becomes to walk away, even when it's bad for you. So you might think, well, I've been here for 5 years. I worked so hard to get this role, and I can't just throw it all away. But the truth is, staying won't get that time back. Leaving won't erase what you've learned. And there is also, of course, a financial and social pressure. Let's be real. Psychology isn't the only factor. People stay because they need the paycheck. They fear gaps on their resume. They worry about references. They want to disappoint family. They're afraid of starting over and also explaining themselves in job interviews. And these are valid concerns, but they often mask the deeper emotional hooks underneath. So for many people, work actually becomes part of their identity. It's just what happens automatically. You can work against it, but in some way it becomes part of your identity. And if your job is toxic, you might think, if I leave, who am I? And what if I fail somewhere else too? And what if this is the best I can do? And toxic workplaces often erode your confidence until staying feels safer than leaving, actually. And then when people finally leave, research shows that people typically leave toxic jobs after there was a major incident, like public humiliation, unfair punishment, when they've had enough, a health scare, a supportive friend or colleague validating their experience, and also a new opportunity appearing unexpectedly. It's rarely a calm, rational decision. I mean, in this case, when you're in a toxic workplace, in a toxic work environment, you cannot be calm anymore anyway, but it's not a rational decision. And it's usually a moment of clarity after months or years of confusion. And it finally clicks and you're like, okay, I have to leave now. So if you're listening to this and if you recognize yourself in these patterns, I want you to know that staying in a toxic job doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're human. It's totally normal. But these psychological mechanisms are powerful and they affect people across industries, all levels, all backgrounds, all over the world. So awareness is the first step. You deserve a workplace where you feel safe, respected, and valued. So before we wrap up, I want to give you a few signs that can actually help you recognize earlier and more clearly when a workplace is crossing the line from stressful to genuinely harmful. These aren't medical indicators and they are not meant to diagnose anything. They're simply patterns that research in organizational psychology consistently links to unhealthy work environments. So when your baseline changes, and not in a good way, it's definitely a sign. If you notice that your normal has shifted, pay attention. For example, you wake up with dread more days than not. You feel constantly on edge and you're bracing for criticism even when you've done nothing wrong. Studies on chronic workplace stress show that people often adapt to harmful environments without realizing how much they've changed. When you stop trusting your own perception, if you find yourself thinking, maybe I'm just imagining this, or maybe I am the problem, maybe I'm too sensitive, even when the situation is crazy and absolutely everything but normal and just toxic, then that's a red flag for sure. Research on gaslighting shows that self-doubt is one of the earliest signs that something is off. It's just hard to recognize in the beginning. When you're constantly justifying the behavior of others, if you hear yourself saying they're under a lot of pressure, it's not always like this, they didn't mean it that way, you might be minimizing behavior that would be unacceptable anywhere else. And to be fair, in most of the cases, you might already have that gut feeling and you know that you shouldn't be justifying someone's behavior when they're clearly being toxic. You kind of know, but you only later on really fully realize. And when your world gets smaller, toxic workplaces often isolate people, and not always intentionally, but effectively for sure. So if you notice that you have less energy for friends and you stop talking about work because it's too exhausting and you feel like no one would understand, that's a sign the job is taking more from you than it gives. And if you fantasize about leaving, but feel unable to act, this is one of the clearest psychological indicators. When you think, I want out, I cannot do this anymore, I wish I could just walk away, I wish I didn't have to go back tomorrow, but you feel frozen. And that's often the result of the psychological mechanisms we talked about earlier: intermittent reinforcement, self-doubt, and the sunk cost fallacy. So if you look at who you were before the job and who you are now, and the gap feels uncomfortable, that's a powerful signal. So if any of these signs resonate with you, it doesn't automatically mean you have to quit tomorrow, but it does mean something in your environment deserves your attention. Awareness is the first step towards reclaiming your clarity and your power. You deserve a workplace where you don't have to shrink to survive. Thank you for listening. And if this episode resonated with you, feel free to share it with someone who might also need it. And feel free to share your personal story anonymously with me. Stay strong. Thank you for listening, and I hope I see you in the next one. Bye bye.